The history of Biafra has been told from various perspectives, but the horror may not be well defined until you read or hear about the experience of a child soldier who was conscripted at the age of 13. This is the experience of Dr. Okey Anueyiagu, who just published a book titled Biafra, The Horrors of War. The Horrors of War, taking it from the perspective of a child soldier. He now joins us via Skype from Atlanta in the United States to give us more insight into this book. Good morning.
Thank you so much.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us. I mean, reading your book, going through your book gave me some level of thrills and excitement, especially as, you know, the story and history of Biafra, just as, you know, Tiana Besso, my colleague, just said, has been told, you know, from different perspectives and prisms. So take us through memory lane. From your account of the war as documented in your book, you grew up in northern Nigeria, interestingly, with your parents during the colonial days. What was it like growing up in the north, being a Nigerian from the Igbo extraction?
Thank you very much for having me this morning. And excuse me if I sound a bit groggy because it's 3 o'clock in the morning here. But I'm glad to be on your TV station. And I would first and foremost tell you how come I wrote this book. It was my second daughter who was doing a program in college, and she was asked by her professor to write on Biafra. And she called me and said, I don't know anything about the war. Can you tell us about Biafra? And then I did a 2 or 3 page analysis of my experience from the war, starting from when it brewed in northern Nigeria and Kano, where I was born, to when it ended in the east. And she submitted the writing to the school, and they found it interesting. And I sent it along to some friends who thought I should write a book on Biafra. I never wanted to talk about the war because it reminded me of the vagaries of war, the horrors of war. And I made an effort not to even read any book about the war. I just wanted to stay out of the experiences that I personally went through during the war. But in writing the book, I found out that it afforded me and so many readers the opportunity to know the history of that war. Since, according to what I hear and according to what I think you all know, history was taken out of the curriculum of our schools from elementary to university levels in Nigeria, and that was a crying shame. And the story that I tried to tell in this book was conceived from facts and evidence of what happened from 1966 up to 1970 in January when the war ended in the East.
Yeah. All right, Doc. Maybe you should answer to the question, you know, of what your experience was like growing up in northern Nigeria, you know, with your parents being a Nigerian from the Igbo extraction.
Okay, I would go straight to that question, but I thought I should lay some foundation.
And we appreciate that. We appreciate that. Thank you. Yes.
I grew up in Kano. I was born in the 50s, just before independence. My father was a journalist like you. He was editor of a group of newspapers founded by his friend Zik Azikiwe. And I grew up under the auspices of a journalist who was editor-in-chief of newspapers, writing and reading stories about independence. And my experience in Kano was that we lived so harmoniously with our neighbors. And there was not a single rancor, no problems until the coup of 1966, January 15th coup of 1966. And we began to experience turmoil, killings, riots targeted against the Igbos who lived in many parts of northern Nigeria. And that occasioned our fleeing from those northern zones to where we come from, the east, me particularly to Oka. And then the war started from there. My experiences were very bitter experiences.
All right, Doc, I'm wondering, it took you about 54 years to document your experience as one who participated in the Civil War as a child soldier. I'm just wondering why, it took you that long to write this book.
Yeah, like I said initially, I was very reluctant to revisit the issues about the war. I mean, if you were 12, 13, 14, and you were laying in the jungle, fighting, sleeping in the forest, encountering all sorts of things that are things that you can only dream of, you would like to put the memories behind you and move on with your life. And that was what I did, essentially. But the reason I wrote this book was I began to feel that our history was being rewritten and not being properly embraced by the world. We began to forget why we fought that war. Hence, a lot of things that happened in 1966 are beginning to crop up again now. So two reasons why I didn't write the book earlier than now. I just didn't want to revisit the hardship that I personally suffered, and it was a nightmare. And then I didn't want to, I didn't even bother to read any books that were written on Biafra, because I thought that to myself and to many people that why would I want someone else to tell me the story of a war that I saw from the beginning to the end?
I mean, being a child soldier at 13 can be, no doubt, really traumatic. I'm wondering how easy it was for you to put all of that behind you. Did you ever get closure?
Well, it was easy for me, if you've read this book, to get a closure, because I was quite young. And when the war ended in January, I think it was January 10th or so, I was just barely going to be 14 years old. And, like a child, I got reintegrated into the system, and I began to forget very quickly those experiences of the war and got reintegrated into life again. And it was easy for me to forget some of the things that happened during the war, and because maybe I was a child. But for adults, I think they still carry the pains of that war till today.
All right, now let's look at what led to the Civil War and how you were eventually conscripted into that war. Many still believe that the war was provoked by the January 15, 1966 coup, which you mentioned earlier, led by Major Chukwuma Kaduna Eziogu and, of course, Emmanuel Ifeajua. But you seem to have a contrary opinion to these accounts. Share with us what you think caused the war and how you were eventually conscripted into that war as a 13-year child soldier.
Okay, what I tried to do with my book was to document my personal experiences. I didn't want to become overly too analytical and talk about what caused the war and what didn't cause it. Although in the course of writing this book, I encountered several reasons that I thought personally were responsible for the war. The coup by the Nzogu group was formed and executed principally by 14 officers. If you look in my book, I mentioned all the names. Only 2 of them were of Igbo extraction. And of course, they labeled it an Igbo coup. It wasn't an Igbo coup, in my opinion. I think they wanted to call the dog a bad name so they can hang the dog, okay. And that was what we went through. It wasn't an Igbo coup. If you see the 14 major coup planners of that particular coup of January 15, 1966, only about 4% of them were Igbo, 2 of them, really. And we got into trouble because people had misconceptions, whether they planned it or not. It wasn't an Igbo coup, period.
But
from your accounts, there is no doubt that you were an integral part and participated actively in that civil war. But looking at events, that played out before the war eventually broke out, could the civil war in 1967 have been averted?
It could have been. If you look at the role that Ojukwu played, he tried in so many ways to to find a peaceful resolution to the problems that started in the north. But it seemed to me that some people were bent on having that war executed.
Okay. All right. We are kind of curious about, the history and how it has been told from many perspectives. You don't want to go to the analytics of the war, which we do appreciate. But can you give us a snippet, even though we've read your book? We would like to hear from you, some of those incidents that caused that mistrust, about the Igbos. Because we do understand that when that coup happened, top military officers from northern Nigeria were executed, except, of course, those from the southeastern part of the country, to the extent that, General Ironsi became the head of state after that coup.
Well, I don't think northern officers were executed. Some politicians and maybe one or two officers were killed in the process. And what I understand by history was that a certain group of the coup plotters were sent to Enugu to carry out an assassination of Opara, who was the premier of Eastern Nigeria. And that upon getting there, I think the group of officers were led by Gibson Jalo, who retired after being the chief of army staff. But upon getting to Enugu to execute their part of the coup, they could not do it because Opara was indisposed and was in the company of certain foreign dignitaries. And I think that was what gave the coup some coloration of tribal sentiments that gave the impetus for northern officers and some of the western officers to join in the killing of Igbos in the north and in the west.
All right, Doc, maybe you should tell us, reading through your book, we saw how combative you were, how at 5 you were able to resist intimidation of those who came into your house to arrest your father then. And it was quite interesting, and we also read about how you also struggled to get into school even when you were not of age. That resilience, that persistence, from your account is what, stood you out as an interesting child. But tell us how you were eventually, take us through, how you were eventually conscripted into the Biafran army at age 13.
Well, the story is quite extensive and interesting. I myself, when I reread the book after I wrote it, it was a spontaneous action by me. I found it very fascinating. It was quite an interesting book. Some of my friends called me and said that they laughed and they cried, and they went through a range of emotions just reading the book. My children, 2 or 3 of my children couldn't even read the book all through because they felt a rush of emotion and anger, and they told me it was just too heavy for them to read. But for me, I think it was a divine intervention from God that enabled me to put the stories in this book together, beginning from when I was 5 or 6, that I tried to defend my mother when she was practically attacked by some colonial officer accompanied by policemen. This must have been in 1959 or thereabouts. And it gave the book some coloration of, funny antics. And then, from there, it took me all the way. You asked me how I was conscripted. I was working for the Red Cross during the war, helping them to, serve civilians who were dying of hunger. And I had just left the Red Cross facility somewhere in Umuawalo, going home after I had this job. And I encountered a bunch of Biafran military personnel who were conducting what they called conscription then. Some people didn't want to go to war. They were either cowardly or just didn't have the guts to go to war, so they were hiding. And they called me and asked me how old I was, and I told them. They didn't believe me. they proceeded to conduct what they called verification of age by asking me to drop my trousers for inspection, upon which they thought I was 17 and then, had me join the conscripted members of the military, and took me to war from there.
Now, in the book, you accuse Britain of complicity, claiming also that Russia provided aerial support for the Biafran oppressors, while America paid little or no attention. Can you clarify for us these examples that you gave and these your reservations about those who supported the war?
Yeah, when the war broke out, Nigeria didn't really have the proper elements, machineries of war. So they, of course, went to Britain, went to Russia, the Soviet Union then under Russia control, and they acquired jets, armored tankers, all sorts of arms and ammunition by which they prosecuted the war. And Biafra got some from certain mercenary infusion into the war. But the bulk of the armament that Nigeria used in the prosecution of the war came from Britain and Russia.
All right, Doc, according to you, quoting from your book, if Biafra was allowed to succeed, it would have been one of the richest and most powerful countries in the world, as, according to you, it housed most of the oil deposits in the world. Do you think this would have happened, considering the fact that Biafra wouldn't have, been insulated from corruption and bad governance, which we are witnessing today in Nigeria?
It would be difficult to ascribe that to Biafra, but when I said what I said, I meant that if you look at the projection of the people of Biafra in 1960, before 1966, before the crisis started, they had a more focused, a more resilient attitude to life, to business, to politics, that one would conveniently say that the projection would have continued if they were allowed to be a country. I'm not going to insulate them from the problems that Nigeria is having today. But one could just speculate on that.
Interesting bit there. You said earlier that when your children went through the book, there was a gush of emotion and, of course, anger. And you said what the issues that held sway, before and after the Civil War are still sway till today. Can you tell us, if the adoption of dialogue is a better option to resolve, conflict, to resolve, acrimony across the country at this time?
Yeah, but I wrote in part of the book, I think that if you have spent time in the trenches, in the war front, and you've had the sound of bombs and machine guns, you would never wish for wars to happen again. And that in wars, nobody wins. I don't think Nigeria won that war. Because if Nigeria won that war, why are we still going through what we're going through now? Nobody won that war. The war is still raging today. And believe me, I think that we have gone back to square one from where we started that war from.
Now, what are those specific issues you think that, the country can begin to pay attention to? Those issues that actually threaten our unity as a country that you think perhaps we should revisit, focus on it, resolve it through dialogue and entrench unity in the country?
Yes, that's a very good question. In 2014, I was fortunate enough to be a member of the Southeast, the Igbo delegation to the National Conference that President Jonathan Goodluck called. And we had a thorough four-month delegation to the conference where we discussed multiple issues and came up with recommendations that we gave government at the end of the deliberations. which is favorably referred to now as restructuring. There were many issues in the document that was submitted that if government had the political will then to implement, to adopt through the political process, those things from the conference, I don't think we should be experiencing the turmoil that Nigeria is experiencing today. And I can go from one issue to another, from federalism, true federalism, evolution of power, to even the police reform, where we recommended that we should have a two-tier police system, the zonal police, the 6 zones, and the national police. The zonal police drawing personnel from the zone. If you're from Oka, where I'm from, you become a policeman in the zone, not to transport somebody from Sokoto to come to Oka to become a policeman to police affairs of people, does not understand their language, does not understand the culture, but is there trying to police the system. These were the things that we put in the recommendation that government threw away and parried it to politicians who didn't want to have anything to do with it.
Doc, when you look at, how the East has fared under a united Nigeria, decades after that war ended, looking at the current realities, that stare us in the face as a country, will you say the Igbos have recovered from the pains and injuries of that civil war?
I would not say so, because have you driven from Enugu to Onitsha, or from Port Harcourt to Enugu? All the road systems in the East have collapsed. There's nothing happening in the East. So I think the Civil War, maybe Igbos as individuals have fared well because they're hardworking, they know what they're doing, but collectively, the region has been dumped by the rest of Nigeria, and I don't know why.
You don't know why? Okay, you don't know why that region. It gives an impression, what you just said gives an impression that the Igbos are yet to recover from the civil war. How else do you think the Igbos can actually get closure and recover?
If you read through my book once again, I'm sure you've done that, but you see where I recommended that we should have a reconciliation and a rehabilitation committee that should look into the problems of the war thoroughly, in the truest form of it, to discuss why we fought that war, the consequences of the war, and then profile solutions to those problems. If we don't do that, we are wasting our time. We're going round and round in a, like Professor George Obioza, my friend, would say, in a concentric circle of conspiracies, and we're deceiving ourselves. We should, the government, if they're willing, should set up a committee in the truest form of the word committee to look into the problems of the Civil War. Why did we fight this war? Have we rehabilitated those who, 3 million people died from this war? What happened to them? What happened to their children? What happened to, no victor, no vanquished? It looks like there were victors and there were vanquished people. The Igbos were vanquished. And this is quite unfortunate. And in writing this book, I didn't want to begin to vilify people and blame them for this and that. I just wrote my story. And if reading between my story, you can pick up the things that happened and the solutions to the problems, I would be very, very happy that I've done a good job.
All right, Doc, the war ended after 3 years of fighting. And just like you rightly put it there, there was a declaration of no victor, no vanquished, even though you believe that Nigeria did not win in that war. But you still hold the view that post-war Nigeria remains divisive. What do you think is responsible or triggering this, divisions, years after that war was fought?
No, I was, on that point, I was quite forceful. And I wrote in that book, and I still stand by it, that there's an inherent hatred of the Igbo. And I stand by that. Otherwise, why would us, one part of the tripod of the Nigerian state, be so disfavored in governance, in politics, in the economics, in every, I don't know I don't know if you've traveled to the east recently. I used to love to go to Oka, where I'm from, go to Enugu, go to Maria, go to Aba, go to those places. You will see a high level of degradation that has destroyed the entire southeast. And you begin to wonder, are we still in the same country?
What would you say to those Nigerians listening to you right now and saying that, yes, we empathize with the people of Igbo land, especially those who fought the war and who are faced with the trauma of the war. But what exactly are the leaders of the Southeast doing to alleviate the suffering, poverty, and lack of infrastructure in that region, considering that they have representation in the Federal Executive Council and some of them hold sway in certain ministries and parastatals of the federal government, including, of course, the governors in the various states?
No, I believe in some of the conspiracy theory that, some Igbo intellectuals have put forth, that the representation we have is not really representation. They're just mere tokenism. People who go to government to look after themselves and their pockets, and without presenting proper representation for us. And for that reason, one does not really expect much from them. And I'm sorry to say this.
All right.
This is a perception from most people from the Southeast. They might not voice it, publicly, but privately, when you speak to them, they will tell you that our so-called representatives from some of the governors, I'm not saying all of them, have let us down.
All right, Doc, it's about 3:30 a.m. in Atlanta in the U.S., where you are talking to us from, and we'll just allow you take some coffee or water, as you wish. We'll go on a break, and when we come back, we'll continue with the conversation.
Just stay with us.
Thank you very much. This is quite enlightening.
Thank you.
All right, we still have with us Dr. Okey Anueyiagu, who joins us via Skype from Atlanta in the United States to review his book, Biafra, The Horrors of War, the story of a child soldier. Thanks again for joining us, Doc.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, there has been this clamor for Igbo presidency for a while now, and so many people in eastern Nigeria are hoping that this comes to fruition. But over the years, just like Salmatu said, we've had Igbos, in positions of authority, both at the federal and sub-national levels. Do you trust, in the political leadership, of those who have represented the Igbos, currently and over the years in advancing the cause of the Igbo struggle? Or if you don't trust, in the abilities of the current political leadership of the Igbo people, what other options are available to advance the cause of southeastern Nigeria?
Well, I trust in the political leadership of the Igbo. They are well-versed in politics, both in the academics and the practice of politics. But, the process of elections and selections in Nigeria are quite cumbersome. I studied political science and economics in school, in graduate school, and I believed then, and I still believe now, that politics is almost like pure science, where when you plan, what you plan should happen. But Nigeria defies all these parameters of measuring how politicians will behave, be the politicians of Igbo stock or from other tribes. So I believe that all tribes in Nigeria can present credible people. But the way the game is played in Nigeria leaves very, very little to be desired. And we have good people, but most of them are running when you have talks all over the place parading as leaders of our tribe. Some people just don't want to get entangled in the mire of the nonsense called politics in Nigeria. For that matter, it's difficult to answer your question directly without contradicting what is on ground. But I believe that the Igbo can present proper leadership if we do proper assessment of the qualities of the leaders in that zone or from that zone.
Now let's look at the separatist agitation that we see coming out of the southeast and some part of the country. What do you think can be done to put an end to these agitations, including the struggle for Biafra and Oduduwa republics going on across the country?
When we went to the conference in 2014, one very intricate part of our submission to the government then was the right to self-determination. We paraded over 120 solid Igbo members of the Southeast delegation, from the academia to traders to professionals, and we were meeting like 20 hours every day for 4 months. We had this debate. It was quite an extensive debate, and in this debate we talked about the right to self-determination, and we agreed that states functioning as federating units in the federation, in the true federation, should have the right to self-determination if they want. So I believe that if there's any section of the country that feels marginalized, like the Igbos feel marginalized, and they want to go their separate ways, they should go. It should not be a matter of, oh, you cannot go, you stay, and we continue to persecute you, we continue to deprive you of what you deserve out of the federation. So we made our submissions, and we said that ethnic nationalities in Nigeria have the right to self-determination, and I still stand on that.
It's quite interesting that in this book, you actually talked about citizenship, indigents, settlers dichotomy, which I find really interesting. You said all Nigerians born in any part of Nigeria should, after 5 years from the date of birth, acquire citizenship rights of the people of birth. How feasible is this, considering again the fact that despite your experiences in the war and the sharp divisions, of course, that it created, you settled for someone from the north as a wife. Now, share with us why you took the decision to marry Hadiza.
Okay, I live in Lagos, and I live in Ikoyi, Lagos, and I've been living in Lagos since I came back to Nigeria, moving from one part of Nigeria to another. And I believe that if I've lived in Lagos for 20 or 30 years, I deserve to become a citizen of Lagos State. And nobody should tell me that the houses, the investment that I have in Lagos do not belong to me because I am Igbo. And that's what I meant by the right to become a citizen of any part of Nigeria where you find yourself. Fortunately, the Igbo tribe, people from the southeast, are the most widely traveled citizens of Nigeria. You find them in any part of Nigeria. They love to expand. They love to go out and invest, cohabitate with their neighbors and live peacefully with their neighbors. They don't form trouble. They just don't look for trouble. From when we lived in Kano, Bisi Olatilo, who was one of your colleagues, was living on my street. That's how come he speaks Igbo fluently. He learned it from me, from us. I learned some Yoruba from him and some Hausa from living in Kano. But those things don't happen again these days because we have divided ourselves into zones, into tiny, tiny zones with hatred permeating our lives. And to why I married from the north.
Yes.
I think it was a divine process. I just didn't plan to say, okay, I'm going to marry somebody from the north. And if you read through my book, you would see that I met my wife some 32 years ago, 35 years ago, while I was in graduate school in New York, and she was in law school in New York. And we met, and I didn't even know she was Nigerian. She didn't know I was Nigerian. And we met in New York, and 2 or 3 years after, we married.
Thank you so much. That's the best place to, not a bad place to anchor this conversation, Dr. Okey Anueyiagu. Dr. Okey joined us to review his book, Biafra, The Horrors of War, the story of a child soldier. Thank you so much, Doc, for sharing your time with us this morning.
And of course, your experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much. And I want to congratulate you and congratulate your station for doing such a fabulous job doing Nigerians proud.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you very much.